Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to Radio Wasteland, the greatest show about the paranormal and conspiracies ever known to man. I'm getting crazy, throwing my hands around, animated, burning calories.
Way to sell it.
Yep, I'm your host, Chauncey Hallworth, and this is my co-host, Kara. How's it going, Kara?
Good.
Anything new and exciting this week?
Well, I've finished up the first draft of this horror novel that I've been working on, so I'm very happy about that.
All right, so you're going to move on and get all famous and leave me behind?
I mean, that's the plan. Who knows if it'll work that way, but...
You're going to regret it, man. This is an old man's world. You know? You're going to try to move on, and you're going to totally fail, and you're going to be, I should have stayed with that old man, Chauncey.
Don't worry. I'll be on Radio Wasteland forever. You are not replacing me.
No, I have no intention.
Yeah.
You already ruined my plot to replace you, so...
I know.
Way to mess it up. All right, so I had a hateful week.
Oh, good.
You know, I constantly complain about this stuff, but... So I'm in this Facebook group, Mr. Spock's Dank Meme Stash.
Oh, yeah.
You know? And
of course you are, first of all.
And so I post something up there, you know, kind of making fun of both sides of politics, about how none of us are able to change our own oil or make ossobuco from scratch without a recipe, yet we all have...
Bad move.
We all have it all figured out when it comes to racial equality and nuclear why do I keep having a hard time with that word? This is like the nuclear weapons and the economy.
The word is proliferation.
Proliferation. Yes. I know that. I'm just, it's like synonym.
I mean, I don't know that you knew that. I think I had to say it.
All right. Well, it must be hard to be so smart.
See, this is why I love being on the show. I just get to rip you apart on air. That's literally the only reason I do it. I don't care about the paranormal.
Man,
I'm just here to hurt you.
I got to tell you, if that's what you consider ripping apart on air, I am being really nice to you.
I would be devastated, okay?
Yeah. You got to hear me talk when I'm over hanging out at Jared's.
Pronouncing a word wrong and being called out on it, that would kill me inside.
Well, I'll cry in the bathroom later.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm in there, and this guy like starts harassing me because he's a vegan or something about ossobuco. Sure. And, so of course, in the interest of being nice, I post a carrot ossobuco recipe. But this guy goes on, he takes photos from my profile and starts making jokes about me, trying out for gay adult films and stuff like that. And he's totally just tearing into me, going through my profile and using my own pictures.
So he was actually ripping you apart.
He was trying, and I finally, as a mature adult male, I'm just oh God, I didn't know it was bad to be gay. I'm so ashamed, And and he just keeps tearing into me, and finally I just say, man, I got to go back to looking at dank memes. So I'm going to let you go, but it's been fun getting gay bashed by you, and that's the end of it. But basically, this whole thing out of this guy was how he was all about animal rights while gay bashing me.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was a little weird,
Yeah.
And I don't know if he was trying to prey on my manliness, hey, this guy's not gay, so I'm going to prey on this, and this is obviously going to offend him or something.
Who knows?
But this is going on all across the place, and I feel just sort of really stupid that okay, here's my other story. I'm at the casino. My wife and I go to the casino every Friday night. That's what we call date night, but it's really going to do what Terry wants.
Sure.
And
date night.
Right, date night. That's a healthy attitude. I like that. She'll like that too. And I'm talking to this guy. I've met him before, older guy, and he's a business owner. He's got some employees, and I would like to get some employees, but it's hard because you want to provide stability for them, and you need to be sure that you're going to be able to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And he's just, oh yeah, my employees, they show up if they want it, and blah blah blah. And we're talking about getting employees.
You say it just like that?
Yeah, pretty much. Until he says, yeah, my best employee's been my best employee for 6 years. And then he up and I'm going to say verbatim what this guy said.
Okay.
It's not a bad word, but it's frowned upon.
Sure.
Jared's getting ready with the button. He's just, oh yeah, this guy's been my best employee for the past 6 years, but then he up and turned queer on me.
Yeah, queer isn't a bad word.
And I look at him...
But clearly the way this guy was saying it was like...
And I'm all, does he still show up to work on time all the time? And he's all, oh, yeah. And I'm just all, what is the problem? I don't understand how this fit into our conversation, you know? So I'm feeling a little shocked that I think I have this sort of like California-colored glasses on. I think the world is a lot more racist and sexist and homophobic than I thought it was.
So... Speaking as a trans woman.
Yeah, all right, let's hear it.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can only vouch for two of them.
Right, yeah. So I've just really sort of been taken aback. It's like I like try to follow groups because I want some lightheartedness during my day. So I followed like this Gary Larson group so I can see Far Side memes. They're ragingly racist and full on just raging political battles, you know, just going on over Far Side and Star Trek, you know. It's like,
well,
what?
Yeah, Mr. Spock's dank meme stash is supposed to be all about logic. It's Mr. Spock.
Totally, or at least memes. I'm thinking about leaving because it started to become just posts about stuff that without a meme. If you got a meme attached, you're fine.
Well, you know, I was having a conversation with someone about racism recently, and you know what I think the problem is? The root of a lot of these disagreements is, like, whether you trust anecdotal evidence versus whether you trust data. Personally, I'm a data person. If someone tells me a story about their life...
Is this a Star Trek reference?
Well, okay, first of all, yes, I love data.
Yeah, there's no room for you in Mr. Spock's dank meme stash if you're a data person.
But, okay, if someone's trying to tell me, you know, this is how I think the economy works, because everyone I know is like this, I'm like, well, maybe everyone you know is only one way, because those are the only people you can connect with. Yeah. Because your lives are like them. You know, I want to see the figures.
Totally.
A lot of people don't want to see the figures at all.
Right.
People are hardwired to do stories and anecdotes and that kind of thing. So when someone's telling you, yeah, I've never experienced racism, neither have any of my friends, I'm like... So I'm feeling like there's a common factor between you and your friends.
Yeah.
It has something to do with the fact that you're all very white.
And men.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were talking about racism in this particular conversation, but it's...
Well, this happens all the time. Like, people, like, my wife will be out shopping, and, like, people will say, like really sort of mean, aggressive things to her, like the cashier and stuff like that. None of these people would ever say these things to my face, the things that my wife comes back and says, can you believe this person said this to me? None of these people would ever say this to me. I've never heard anything like it. Because I look like a biker dude or something. Exactly. You know, so they're obviously preying on her because she's a woman or diminutive in some sort of way that they can get away with it. You know?
Yeah, when you explain this kind of thing to people, when you show them studies and that kind of thing, well, studies mean nothing. And other people's experiences... also don't tend to mean very much as long as they have their own experience they can counter with.
Yeah, I guess.
I think that's just kind of the way people are wired.
Well, all you people out there, just, you know, less talk, more rock. Get out there and vote and shut up. All right, so our guest is coming up, Paul Blake Smith, talking about JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot here on Radio Wasteland.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. Welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, Paul Blake Smith. We're talking about his new book, JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot. Paul, are you there with us?
I'm here and doing well. I hope you're the same.
I am. And so, I got to say, I have no idea what the Willard Hotel Plot is.
Way to lay it out there.
I just got to throw it out there. You know, I was talking with my wife about it. I tried to research it a little bit without, you know, sort of scraping your content, trying to find, and really, I didn't know what it was. So, first, let's cover this is Paul's third appearance on Radio Wasteland.
Indeed.
Paul is shaping up to be quite the prolific author. Yet another person to make Kara and I jealous of our failed writing careers.
True.
Yeah.
So well done.
Thanks. All right. So, Paul, can you just sum up what the importance is of the Willard Hotel with this JFK and the Willard Hotel
Right.
plot?
A little backstory that in 2005, two very fine researcher, authors, one a radio host, Tom Hartman, and his partner, Lamar Waldron, produced a book called Ultimate Sacrifice. They did terrific research into the Kennedy assassination and discovered a recurring theme that Carlos Marcello, the mobster, was the one who initiated the plot, vowing revenge on the Kennedy brothers and their war on organized crime. And he enlisted during the summer Lee Harvey Oswald, and even spoke of this when his prison cell was bugged in the late 80s, early 90s. Carlos Marcello went to prison in Texarkana and mentioned how he personally met with Oswald that summer and checked him out for the job as the patsy, the dummy to be left behind. Said that he did initiate the JFK killing, proudly boasted of it, and that the Ultimate Sacrifice authors found that the plan was to shoot President Kennedy in a motorcade in an American city from a tall office building or a hotel. And in Tampa, 4 days before the JFK shooting in Dealey Plaza, President Kennedy went through town in a public motorcade in his open limousine, just like he did in Dallas. And they went right past the Grand Floridian Hotel, where they made a slow turn and right in front of the hotel, and police were very worried about this. They got a tip that there was going to be a shooting, and they beefed up security, and the Secret Service beefed things up. And so President Kennedy survived that November 18th. And some of that actually made the newspapers back then. So I believe in their theory. They provide plenty of substance to this plot, and they even got a History Channel special out of it. But I go back to October 1st, when Lee Harvey Oswald was apparently in the vicinity of the Willard Hotel, 2 blocks from the White House. And guess what was going by on October 1st? JFK in an open-car motorcade. Oswald was seen 4 days before and spoken to, according to a Treasury document that had been buried for decades, and it's come out now, that Oswald was seen coming out of the hotel, and he got into it with a government employee outside the building. He couldn't control his temper, and they definitely pinpointed this was Lee Harvey Oswald. It was something the public really didn't need to hear. They wanted a case of Oswald woke up one morning and decided to shoot President Kennedy in Dallas, and that's all there was to the case. So I put together this clue and about 9 others and plenty of other data for my new book to show that Oswald was going to initially shoot President Kennedy in Washington, D.C. That was the mafia plan that summer. That is my theory. It's tough at this date to prove, but there are some documents that help to back it up.
So maybe you could remind me and the listeners, after Oswald did the shooting, he tried to get away. How did we catch him?
He first panicked, and when a cop pulled him over, he shot him, an officer named J.D. Tippett, and ran across town, Oak Cliff, Texas, where he was seated in a movie theater, and someone thought he was suspicious. They called the cops. Police arrived, and they asked him merely to stand up. Well, he went berserk and tried to shoot them, further indicating his guilt. You don't go trying to shoot police officers if you're an innocent person who was an innocent bystander at the time of the parade. So Oswald was taken to police headquarters, and he was held in custody. And it's interesting to know that in his pocket was an address for a street in Washington, D.C., the Soviet Embassy, and a diplomat named. And it turns out that another clue is that J. Edgar Hoover had the FBI run down what do we know about this Oswald on the day of the assassination. And one of those clues in this FBI memo is that Oswald was in Washington and visited the Soviet Embassy. So that was something that had to be kind of hushed up for years, but now we know that it sure looks like Lee was in D.C., and this is one of the things he was doing there, probably trying to get a visa to go to Cuba.
I see. Yeah, the reason why I asked how he got away and that he tried to run was I feel that sort of illustrates that somewhere at the other end of that running was maybe some money, and that he wasn't just some crazy guy that was just looking to shoot him.
That's right. He left $200, almost $200, in a cup for his wife to find that morning when she woke up. Just a few days before the shooting, Oswald went shoe shopping with his wife, and he had no money to buy his daughter's shoes. Suddenly, he had $200, about $187 in a cup and $13 in his pocket. which would be the equivalent of a few $1,000s. Now, where did impoverished, menial labor on minimum wage get this money? It's pretty obvious, again, that the mafia paid him to do this, probably gave him some money up front and said, when you finish the job, we'll give you the rest of it.
And so the thought is that he was going to run to Cuba, and that's where he would get paid or get money, because I've heard this Cuban connection as well.
Yeah. Oswald was seen in the company of 2 Cuban men on September 25th in various parts of Texas, working his way from Houston to Austin, where he was seen in a restaurant. He made a scene at the state capitol, and he went up to Dallas, and he made a scene, he was mostly well-behaved, at a woman's apartment named Sylvia Odio, and that point, we lose track of Oswald on September 25th that night, and he shows up the 27th at the Willard Hotel. JFK was out of town, and do you know where he was at that point? Just take a wild guess.
Some corner room that was really easy to shoot down to the street.
Have you ever heard of Redding, California?
Oh, really?
Yes. He was on a conservation tour, and on the 27th, he was in a place called Redding, California, ready to give a speech and give a little tour of nature that was out there.
That's crazy. That's really all that's out here.
That is true.
That makes a lot of sense.
Back then.
So, I don't want to ask you that question until we come back from break, because that's a big question.
Hold our listeners in suspense.
Well, it's a big question with a lot of answers.
Possibly the most important question ever asked.
I didn't mean it like that. Come on, give me a break.
Well, I can't wait now.
Well, basically, I guess we'll get started on it, and if I got to cut you off, then I'll cut you off. If this evidence is out there and credible, and there's all this stuff. He was obviously trying to get somewhere. He obviously got the money. The Willard Hotel is factoring in. What is the purpose of the government not backing some of this up and not publicly saying, well, yeah, it's like, why would they still be running with the same old story?
They didn't piece together the clues. Either they were incompetent, or they just kind of wanted to brush everything up into a neat, tidy story that Oswald woke up on the morning of the 22nd and, without a motive, according to the Warren Commission, decided to shoot President Kennedy just for the heck of it, I guess.
As one does.
Yeah, so I believe that is to be false, and certainly in the 1970s, the House Select Committee came to a different conclusion. They had more money and more investigators, and came to the conclusion that Oswald had help, that it was part of a probable conspiracy to kill the president. And since then, no one seems to be investigating the case except private citizens and researchers and authors.
Yeah, it's really kind of amazing for me to think, because we don't really live in the world today, I feel, where organized crime has that level of moxie or power, but
right.
But they did at the time. This was kind of the heyday of organized crime.
That's true. I just spoke to someone the other day. He said his father worked in, I think, law enforcement in Washington, D.C., and he said even back then the mob was controlling nightclubs and bars in Washington, and the state capital, or the city and the nation's capital, right under the noses of, national lawmakers and the FBI and such. They had a real stranglehold on showbiz, that part of nightclubs and strippers and the Jack Ruby kind of world. And so some of these pieces are starting to fit in. It's tough for people to understand now, but the mafia was used to doing business in this country and buying off politicians of both parties.
Right. All right. Well, I'm excited. We got some more questions for you. You are our first JFK guest. We have never discussed JFK here on Radio Wasteland before, so we're pretty excited. All right. You're listening to Paul Blake Smith here on Radio Wasteland. Come on back for some more questions about JFK and the Willard Plot Hotel, his new book. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. We're talking with Paul Blake Smith about his new book, JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot. Carrie, you had a follow-up question about that?
Yeah, so I was just wondering what these mafia types were hoping to accomplish in the first place. Was it Cold War related, or, there's a lot of different motives you can think of, but I'm wondering if we have any idea.
the mafia was involved in a war, all right. They called it the War on Organized Crime, which JFK's brother, Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General, conducted through his Justice Department and FBI contacts. They were really going hard after the mafia. And just a few months after JFK was inaugurated, they scooped up Carlos Marcello, the gangster, and basically just kidnapped him, flew him out of the country, and dumped him off in the jungles of Guatemala. Marcello fell down a ravine and broke his leg and was all torn up, and he swore complete revenge that he would kill the Kennedys for this. And at first, the target was Robert Kennedy. But he knew that if you just killed Robert Kennedy, JFK would replace him with someone even tougher and meaner and really go after the mob. But if you really wanted to hurt the Kennedy family and stop the war on organized crime, you would kill the president. It's interesting to know that Carlos Marcello checked into the Willard Hotel in January of 1961 and watched JFK's open car parade go by, probably the day before, where he could have gotten the whole idea for shooting Kennedy right from the very start. So here's another villain that Oswald was in that hotel. Kennedy himself went in June of 63 to make a speech. He was obsessed with President Lincoln, and Lincoln stayed at the hotel to avoid an assassination plot against him just before his first inauguration in February of 1861. So there's tremendous history, and even one more if you want me to continue.
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right, John Wilkes Booth was spotted in Willard Hotel lobby by Julia Grant, who was destined to be going to Ford's Theater that night with her husband, U.S. Grant, who came by to pick her up. She said Booth was stalking her and glowering at her, and she was really scared and rattled, and they got into a buggy and went down the street. And Booth followed, and he was riding back and forth, glowering at them, and she was so unnerved, she talked U.S. Grant out of not only not going to the Ford's Theater that night with Lincoln, but to get out of town completely. And apparently it was pretty good women's intuition, because they did, and their lives were saved when the president was shot in Ford's Theater that night, and their companion was slashed brutally with a knife by John Wilkes Booth.
What a crazy coincidence.
Yeah, and that's why the Willard
just attracts
Hotel
bad guys like a magnet.
Yeah.
The number one choice for assassins in this country.
So in this case with Oswald, you know, I've heard mentioned before, and then you brought up about him going to the Russian embassy. Beyond him doing that, is there any tie-in that we can pull from that connection there? I mean, you know, it's kind of fitting with the world today and the back and forth today. It's like, was there any potential Russian tie-in to this?
I don't think a Russian tie. However, he was desperate for a trip to Cuba, and the way to get that may have been to go through either the Cuban or Soviet embassy. Well, Washington, D.C. did not have a Cuban embassy. Marina Oswald, Lee's wife at the time, said he was obsessed with Fidel Castro, pinned a picture of him on their wall in their house in New Orleans that summer, and talked often of Uncle Fidel or Comrade Fidel, and how he wanted to go there. He felt it was this Marxist paradise that they could live in, and she said later, I didn't want to go there. I liked America, and she's still in America. She's a pharmacist today in Texas. But Oswald had this crazy, twisted dream. He was what I would call semi-psychotic. I don't think the mafia would have hired him as part of the plot whatsoever if he was a complete psycho. He would have really given everything away. He was not trustworthy, but he was able to function and fire on JFK in Dallas, and I think he was going to in Washington, but the plan fell through for some reason.
So I'm curious, did the mafia get what they wanted in the end? Was Johnson easier on organized crime?
Believe it or not, yes. Prosecutions of the mafia plummeted. They went down like something like 75% over the next few years as RFK quit as the Attorney General, and personnel was changed over there, and they decided for some crazy reason to stop going after the mob so hard.
So the bad guys won?
I'm afraid so. I mean, you can't really put it any other way. The darkest forces in this country, including a guy who was associated with Carlos Marcello, who recruited for the KKK. His name was Joseph Miltier. He was caught on audio tape on November 9th saying JFK's coming to Miami. There's a plot in the works to shoot him from a tall building, an office building with high-powered rifles. And now, part of this audio tape that was captured, people hadn't been able to understand until now. He mentioned, apparently the original part of the plan was, he said, when Kennedy steps out of the White House, we're going to have a man, or we were going to have a man in a hotel across from the White House, pick him off with a high-powered rifle in better weather. He almost gave away the whole Willard Hotel plot right there, and it's still on audio today.
Yeah, that is just wild. It's wild that so much thought has gone into this, and then really when you lay it out like this, it really sort of makes very logical sense, for a world of grassy knolls and magic bullets,
Yeah, the clues have been there, and some of them, like this Willard Hotel encounter with Oswald, have been buried for years. I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but no one seems to have put this together before. And I think my book's getting some attention already as I describe this on radio and podcasts and online, as people are saying, wow, I've not heard this before. I think it's the untold other half of the story that we're just now waking up to. And I let another researcher read it, and he seemed skeptical at first. And when he got it back to me, he said, my advice to anyone is get this book as soon as possible. That's his review of it. So I got that going for me.
Yeah, well, we definitely know you as a sober-minded researcher and author. You're not throwing out too many crackpot ideas, What is up with, do we know anything else about Oswald from before other than just being impoverished? He was nutty, obviously.
Yeah.
But do we know anything about his earlier life that sort of would lead him to this?
Research, some of the Warren Commission dug into his background, and researchers since he attacked his mother when he was a teenager. He was evaluated by a school psychiatrist who talked about his psychotic tendencies back then. He waved a knife around in the face of his sister-in-law. He ran away from home and joined the Marines. And what did he do? He attacked his sergeant and was court-martialed. Then he supposedly accidentally shot himself and was court-martialed a second time. Then he ran off and defected to the Soviet Union. I was reading recently that while he was in Russia, he was trying to make 2 homemade bombs in his apartment, and the KGB would go in when he was out and reported on this, and they were very worried he was going to try to blow up Khrushchev or someone like that. They found the explosive devices in a dumpster outside the apartment later. He gave up on that plan. He tried to slash his wrists and came back to America in one piece, sadly. And when he did, he went after General Edwin Walker, who was just back from a anti-Castro speaking tour. He hated Castro, and he lived in Dallas, so you can tell what's going to happen here. Oswald grabbed his rifle and took a shot at Edwin Walker and just missed. But that gives us an example of how he really wanted to shoot someone and make a name for himself, and his far-left Marxist theories, crackpot theories.
So we know he shot at this guy?
Yeah, there's never been any other investigation that came up with someone else, and he also left a note for Marina, and I believe it can still be read today, what to do in case he got arrested, and he came home that night pale as a ghost, and he later confessed, yes, it was me that tried to shoot General Walker, the anti-Castro American general who was retired and living in the Fort Worth area. Oswald made a map of the area. He stalked General Walker for a couple of weeks, and he took photos, like he used his Marine training to find the best time to get the best shot, and naturally he missed him anyway.
Man, the laws have sure changed when you can take a shot at a general and still be on the street. That's crazy.
The police just didn't have a clue back then, and they didn't put it together until after Oswald was arrested and Marina told this story. And it makes you wonder, when Oswald went to Washington, D.C. in late September of '63, was he going to apply that same Marine training and stalking for the neighborhood around the hotel, and which was 2 blocks from the White House? Did he go around the White House? JFK wasn't there at the time. He came back September 30th for the big October 1st motorcade. And so you also have to wonder, how did Oswald know that there was a motorcade coming in just a few days to be seen at that hotel?
Right. All right. Well, we're coming up on another break here. You're listening to Paul Blake Smith here talking about his new book, JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot, on Radio Wasteland. Come on back. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland with our guest, Paul Blake Smith, and we're talking about JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot, his new book. I got kind of a ridiculous question for you. as a person who doesn't know much about this other than the sort of stuff that I've learned up until now, where does this leave the magic bullet? What's up with the thoughts of a second shooter and all that stuff?
Yeah, I go into that in my book a little bit. It's pretty darn clear. There was a shooter up on the hillside behind the fence that President Kennedy's kill shot was delivered from in front, and the autopsy did their best to cover this up, including faking some photographs. There was a documentary film with the man who developed the pictures, and he came forward and said, look, these pictures, he spoke this to a friend, these pictures are all rigged to cover up the true nature of the wounds, to try to convince the Warren Commission the public was never supposed to see them. That Oswald acted alone and just shot from in back, but the more and more Dallas doctors and eyewitnesses in Dealey Plaza came forward. It's painfully clear there was a large exit wound in the back of the president's head that Oswald could not have possibly been responsible for. And a man named Ron Lewis said Oswald spoke of the plot in New Orleans during the summer of '63 and admitted his shots were only going to be a diversion mostly. He would take his shots at the president, but it was mostly to get people looking the other way for that kill shot that would come from in front. So I think that's a pretty good guesstimate of how it went down.
How does this help the government it seems that it would be more detrimental to the government to have a presidential assassin running around that they didn't know who he was and catch him and possibly later catch him and be wrong. It seems like that would be more detrimental than for them to do this whole cover-up. I guess maybe once again we're in a different time now, and at the time we were sort of at this infancy of this world of media, and the possibility of controlling the media was within the realm of sight at the time, maybe. I don't know.
I agree. The media and basically everyone in this country, you did what your government told you, and you didn't really question it too much or protest too much. That came later in the 1960s under a series of lies from first the Johnson administration, then the Nixon administration and Watergate, and people became very cynical as scandal after scandal mounted. And then when the Warren report came out, people generally accepted it. And as the years went by, there were so many questions about this and so many authors and a few documentaries, the tide began to turn. And to this day, it's about 75-80% of the country polled that doesn't believe for a minute that Oswald acted alone. So I think that's where we stand. I doubt if there'll ever be a strong resolution to the case. The government released some documents last October, 1 year ago, that helped me finish this book, but there was no gigantic smoking gun, and then when they were supposed to release some more in April, it was just a bunch of junk, that they're still withholding lots of documents, and I don't hold out much hope that the government's ever going to really release the whole thing and get into it. But let's face it, it's 55 years ago, and everyone's deceased. So, they could, if they wanted to, tell the whole story.
Yeah, well, how high up does it go? Regardless of a person's view of our current president seems like the sort of guy who, whether you view him as the person who would take this information and make it public or take this information and use it as a distraction, he still seems like the sort of person that would get that out there.
Yeah,
I had high hopes of just that, and yet he suddenly put the brakes on everything and said, let's let the CIA look these documents over and delay it 6 months. And when that happened, there's just nothing. There's just a bunch of junk that was released, and the guts have been ripped out. So I'm disappointed once again. Almost all historians and researchers are disappointed that we're not getting these documents that were mandated by law back in the early 90s after the movie JFK came out from Oliver Stone. And I'll just add real quick, in that movie you saw Joe Pesci, who was terrific, as David Ferry, an acquaintance of Lee Oswald, ranting back and forth about going to Washington to shoot the president. And these were from actual conversations he had that summer. And he said, give me a week, we'll go to Washington, we'll shoot him in a triangulation of crossfire. And one key is to have an alibi for where you are, and another key is we're going to leave one patsy left behind. And that was the plot right there in a nutshell, and you saw some of it in Oliver Stone's movie.
So our engineer here kicked me a question, and he obviously has more knowledge than I do on this, so I might mispronounce this. He asked me to ask, was the Zapruder film the only recording of the assassination?
It seems to be the only really good, clear one. There was an Orville Nix home movie that was taken from across Dealey Plaza but from a further distance, and it was released, and it shows some, but it's the grassy knoll area, if you want to call it that, was very darkly shaded, and the color is not that good up there, and you just can't tell. It's interesting to know that the government got a hold of that Zapruder film and took it to CIA photographic headquarters, and there are a number of sources say now in some books by other researchers that the film was doctored to show only this one possible shot. It's difficult to explain, but they blackened out the hole in the back of the president's head. They said it's pretty obvious to photographic experts, so we can't even quite trust the Zapruder film. It's discouraging, but the cover-up was set into place fairly early, and it makes you question why. Why couldn't we be just told the whole story if it was the mafia alone?
Yeah, especially
nobody likes the mafia.
Especially later on, I'm just surprised that no politician has really sort of come out and tried to gain some credibility for themselves by releasing this information. But I guess it's gone so much into the world of tinfoil hats that maybe somebody doesn't necessarily want to be associated.
No one wants that mocking derision that, oh, you're a conspiracy buff if you're interested in this. And I'll say right out, I don't like conspiracies per se. I don't believe, for instance, that Robert Kennedy was killed in a conspiracy or Martin Luther King Jr. But in the JFK case, the more you read, it's like, oh, goodness, there's no other way around this but to put together Oswald with some other people that didn't want Kennedy to survive Dealey Plaza, and the mafia paid them off. And I believe many eyewitnesses and maybe participants just happened to suddenly die in the immediate years afterwards, and that helped keep the lid on things, didn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming up on the end of the interview here, and I want to make sure that you have time to tell our audience where they can get a copy of your book and find out more about you.
You can go to Argus Publishing. They have their website at aargusbooks.com. The book comes out November 15th. Argus ships directly to you for free, no shipping charges, which is a really good deal if you ask me. You'll also be able to find it in, I believe, ebook form, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com. I try to pack as much information to make sure people get their money's worth. It's like over 400 pages. And I list the bibliography, and I try to put sources and resources utilized to make sure, I didn't just make things up. I try to use facts whenever possible, and it should be out in 1 month from today.
Well, Paul, we really enjoy having you on the show every time, and this was definitely an eye-opener for me. This was a topic I knew very little about, and not only was I reminded the stuff that I sort of grew up learning about, but you hit me with a whole other angle that I really wasn't expecting.
Well, then I succeeded there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for being on the show. You've been listening to Paul Blake Smith here on Radio Wasteland. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. You've been listening to our guest, Paul Blake Smith, talk about his new book, JFK and the Willard Hotel Plot. As a person who wasn't around when that happened, I don't think Paul Blake Smith was either. Mm-hmm. It's always been this sort of like lore thing that sort of floated around in the background, and it was really nothing ever I truly invested myself in. And Kara, you being 20 years younger than I am, I'm guessing it was all the more so.
Oh, yeah, I've really never cared particularly about the JFK plot, and I've always kind of used it as shorthand for, silly conspiracy nonsense.
Right.
But he made a lot of really good points.
Yeah, I agree. And, he sort of put it into the realm.
And plus, we know Paul Blake Smith, and he's not a crazy person.
Right. And I understand what the word conspiracy means. I get that. Right. Any group of people plotting to kill somebody is a conspiracy. But in the realm of this new day and age of conspiracies and deep state and stuff like that, it seems like the real conspiracy there was our government's attempt to cover it up.
Right, and that's the kind of thing
more so than the actual shooting itself.
That generally I scoff at, because I'm like, the government can't cover up anything.
No.
The government leaks like a I can't think of an analogy. Sieve, yes.
Like a sieve.
Like
right.
a thing that leaks a lot. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Like a
incontinent parrot.
Right, or a parrot with prostate problems.
Right.
All right, so...
I don't know why it's a parrot. In this example.
I don't know. They're talking while pissing.
There we go.
Right. So, yeah, I thought that it was really interesting. And you know what was going through my mind at the time, and this is probably one of those topics that I always bring up that's like a touchy one. Wasn't it that in the 60s that our government actually infected black men in the Bay Area with syphilis? And our government didn't actually publicly apologize for it until Clinton.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
So this is going through my head at the time that if they're willing to come out with this,
right,
you know, especially in a time where civil rights is rearing its head again, not that it ever was fixed, but it was, you know, really starting to come up saying like, hey, knock this crap off, you know. We
have seen some, you know, 1968 style riots recently. So.
Right. It just seems to me like somebody, if all this is there, would come out. Like Trump, you would think he would come out and say aliens exist or something if he knew something.
Right.
It's not exactly like he has a filter.
If he could release, you know, a week before the election, say, you know, here, if he could declassify all the relevant documents, say, hey, I'm the first person to do this because I'm draining the swamp or whatever, classic Trump move, that would be really good for him. It's hard to see a downside. His base would love it. So, like, that's a sticking point for me, too. Like, if the government has all this information, then why still the secrecy? All the mafia people involved are dead. All the politicians involved are dead. Everyone involved is dead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It does seem weird that. Yeah. I don't know. And
so and especially I guess I'm
Trump,
not totally
you know,
buying it yet. But
especially
it's still,
Trump. It seems like if there were aliens and we knew if JFK was killed by the mob and we knew, it seems like any of these things, Trump would have spilled that.
Right. Yeah. Discretion is not necessarily his thing, and he's not worried about sounding crazy, which in this case, two things that are assets. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the news is loving the fact that he and Kanye are buddies.
Exactly.
You know, and Kanye's openly talking about how he has gone off of his bipolar medication because he's decided he's not bipolar anymore, even though the doctor said he was. He was talking about this.
I was not aware of this.
He was talking about it in The Thing with Trump. While I watched the Trump Kanye talk, and you ever have that thing when you're watching something and it's like so incredibly lame, but you're by yourself that you fast forward through it because you're like embarrassed, but you're by yourself?
Oh yeah, constantly.
I did that through this thing. I missed like half of this thing because I'm just, oh God, I can't handle it. You know, it was just like, what the heck?
That's kind of how I watched the Republican debates.
You know, Jared seems to think that Trump has some Men in Black affiliations, but is that not what you're saying? Jared, you have a microphone. You don't have to. Mob. Okay. Oh, wait, that's a good point. Okay. Jared actually has a good point here. Trump does have mob affiliations.
Oh, well,
supposedly.
That's certainly true. But probably...
I thought the Men in Black one was much more interesting.
But the point is still all those people are dead, and, you know, anyone who would have cared about the reputations of any of the mobsters involved.
Right.
Like, it's hard to see any reason why anyone would still be covering for anyone involved.
Yeah, that's true. All right, you're listening to Radio Wasteland. My question to you, I don't know. Who do you think killed JFK? Was it a magic bullet? Come on back.
Said I found someone so much better. You got me walking all around beside you. Got me looking all these places like I knew. You got me walking up and down the road 8 days a week. And I tell you I'm about to explode. You say well talking is cheap, but it's all that's left for you and me. Well, it's all that's left for you and me. Well, it's all that's left for you and me. Well, it's all that's left for you and me. Well, it's all that's left for you and me.
All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. Carrie, you got some news for us?
I sure do. A poll done by Groupon this Halloween season indicates that 60% of Americans believe in ghosts.
That's a lot of Americans.
Now, I throw this out to immediately follow it up with, I think the poll's kind of suspect, and it's probably not that high.
Well, it is Groupon.
Right.
You know?
So, that's the thing. I first saw this story on Fox News, because I was looking for stories about ghosts, not that I frequent Fox News, but it's something that came up, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool, mainstream news source, but they're talking about ghosts. This is good. So I'm looking through it, and they reference this poll. I'm like, 60%. That's incredible.
Yeah, and the poll starts with a G. Seems pretty credible.
Well, no, they didn't say who had actually done the poll.
Right. So you're thinking Gallup.
Right. So I try to follow the sources, and I end up at an independent article that says the same thing, but they don't source it either. And eventually, I'm able to track it down to this silly little Groupon poll that really wasn't very scientific at all. So it's like, first off, let's begin this story with just an admonition about taking numbers at face value. Because if they seem really bizarre and interesting, they're probably lies.
Personally, I'm kind of amazed that you're such a His Girl Friday and you fucking, and you chase this thing down to, and you chased it down to Groupon by going through multiple articles.
I'm not an amateur, Chauncey.
I just didn't know you were so professional. I got to come back through and beat myself out as I'm like mocking your professionalness. I dropped the F-bomb.
It took all of 45 minutes.
That's a long time.
Not really.
Jared, when was the last time you committed yourself to something for 45 minutes?
Literally this show right now.
Oh, yeah, that. I was going to say last night when I went to bed.
You get my point then.
Okay. So
you illustrated my point.
There are actually other recent polls on this topic.
All right.
And the number is still shockingly high. There was a Huffington Post YouGov poll, little better, I guess, that indicated 45%. There was a Pew poll, which I pretty much trust implicitly, that said 18% of Americans say they've seen ghosts, which is a high number. Not quite the same thing, though. Because these other ones were who believes in ghosts.
I'm suspect of the pupil because it sounds weird.
It sounds weird?
Pupil?
The Pew Research Center?
Yeah, I don't know. Pupil. I don't like it. It's silly.
Okay.
All right, carry on.
So, first of all, I am now profoundly depressed for humanity and our country. Because of what you said just now. But second of all, I think that's 45% is still a lot, right? That's still more than I would think.
Yeah.
It's almost half.
What this really makes me think of is like maybe they believe in ghosts and stuff like that, but they surely are believing. So Halloween is the second largest holiday fiscally in our country. Mm-hmm. It's a distant two to Christmas, but it is definitely two.
Okay.
And every year I get like 3 trick-or-treaters at my door. I get less and less. I was taking my kids out. I was constantly getting the notes on the door that says, we're religious and we don't do this and stuff like that. It seems like,
really?
Oh yeah. Tons.
I never encountered that when I was trick-or-treating.
Yeah.
No, I did once. We laughed at that lady for like the entire night.
Yeah, you wouldn't think you'd advertise it because, when I was a kid, we'd be coming back.
She just said, no, we don't do trick-or-treating. And we were just like...
Well, thanks for answering the door, lady.
Yeah.
Just turn off your light and go watch something boring on the Hallmark Channel.
So I didn't say that because I wasn't that witty, but God, I wish I had.
Right. So I'm very disappointed in this this anti-kids trick-or-treating. And I get it. It's stranger danger. You know, you got some razor blades and some apples or some business.
Nah.
But, you know.
Few dead kids is not a high price to pay for...
Fun for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can't make an omelet,
It was my favorite holiday.
Yeah, can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Yeah, a few kids are going to die anyway, let's face it.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it happens.
Diabetes.
Eaten by deer.
Yeah, diabetes from the candy.
Or another way to go. Yeah.
So, to me, Halloween, love it.
It's sacred.
Love it, love it, love it. It is sacred. It is totally my religion. Jared hates Halloween.
On account of being an unholy freaking heretic.
Yeah. I wish it was that cool. On account of being a man that is grumpy beyond his years is why he hates it. Because, like, the kids come to the door in their costumes, and he's all like, whatever, I got to get up and answer the door, and then give them candy and pretend how cute they look. This is what Jared's... I'm telling you, he has told me this. This is exactly what he's thinking.
That's
he is
ridiculous.
a hateful
You
man.
come up with the worst, most disturbing costume you possibly can, and you scar those kids. It's surprisingly difficult.
I said I didn't know how to deal with kids. I've never had a kid.
Yeah.
And they make me feel awkward.
So you shouldn't be sick of them yet. I've had 3. I'm sick of them. You know?
Like, hello, small person.
Okay, then the number one thing that you do to any little kid when they're dressed up is you ask one question.
What are you?
What are you supposed to be?
That's too much.
My favorite thing is when I'm at the anime conventions and there's a bunch of kids in costumes and then some like 50-year-old businessman comes in and he's obviously like weirded out. And then I ask him, what are you supposed to be? It's my favorite. All right.
Y'all are overcomplicating this. You wear a paper white mask and answer the door in complete silence and hand out the candy and then slam the door.
Totally.
Easy.
You just huck it at him. Yeah.
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 It's spooky. Right. It's quick. It works. It's the spirit of the holiday.
Yeah. It is our oldest holiday, I think.
Really?
I think so.
I'm actually not aware of the history of holidays.
You know, Christmas is pretty old. You know, we'll go back to Saturnalia and some pagan stuff, but Halloween is definitely pagan.
Harvest festivals of some description.
Halloween is definitely pagan and definitely old and
completely awesome.
Completely awesome.
Yep.
But I'm looking forward to Christmas too because Christmas is evil.
Okay.
There's a lot of awesome evil history about Christmas that we'll talk about in December. All right. Thanks for listening to Radio Wasteland.
From outer space, they are plotting the destruction of the human race. Now our imminent destruction is a looming. It is a bad time to be a human. Spaceship stickers reading Earth above star, broadcasting the beacons of your red star. People pointing to the sky and wanting answers. Say, oh my God, that doctor has made flying saucers.
Restricted zone! It's top secret! That's a security phone! UFO, there goes another UFO. Hey, over there, it's a UFO. That's a long cold daddy in a UFO. Every veterinarian's receptionist will be sending signals to the communists who are relaying the intel to the UFOs who want humankind to tumble down like dominoes. It will happen,
the shots. They injected them with tiny chanting nanobots. And when we hear your doggy buck, she's singing along to the tiny marching army patriotic song. Mama is the queen of the sleazy Pekinese, and her minions call her Christopher Short. She's not a terrier, she's a terrorist. She's the hairiest and the scariest in her court.
The Chow and the Chihuahua, the Boxer and the Doxer, the Hound and the Poodle, the whole kit and caboodle. You've destroyed the very planet that you run. Who will scratch you now and give you treats and table scraps? Who will love you now and pet you sitting on their laps? Everybody stand back. No one gets hurt. Too many people are pushing. Red alert! Red alert! The panic button's stuck from the general's banging on it. We've got to debrief the commander-in-chief. Be very, very wary of the military. Run the word to 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 run the word to